Welcome to the Restitutor Orbis channel, and today we're going to be exploring the Statue of Liberty, one of the most well-known and indomitable symbols of America, its liberty and its democracy. And yes, let us recall that while the United States may be a constitutional republic, what we sell to the rest of the world is democracy. Anakin, my allegiance is to democracy. Well, for all of us, we know that the Statue of Liberty is one of the prime symbols of the United States. And as we're all brought up, wherever we are in the land, we are taught that symbols are very important. They represent things, whether it's a flag, a statue, a monument. Although it should be noted that our society seems to have gone more to emphasizing the flag in recent years, we certainly recall the Statue of Liberty and its paramount importance for representing the United States. And much as we explored Mount Rushmore earlier in this week, we know that the Statue of Liberty is also something as a bit of a time benchmark, if you will. You can always look at that statue, you know what it's been through, and it gives you a reminder that the United States has always been here, and it probably always will be. But what's the true nature behind this statue? What's really the concept behind its construction? Here in this image we see the base, the pedestal, and the statue, the three components of it. We're going to take a look and consider exactly what this statue is made of, and if you've never visited the Statue of Liberty in person, which I know many people who haven't, and many people are aware of it and they're aware of the image of it, but what is it actually made out of? Is this really a statue made out of marble, stone, or is it just simply copper plates or bronze plates? And what about the pedestal? And what about the base? We know what the base is. On this channel we call it a geometrically precise foundation structure. But what's the story behind it? How exactly did they erect this impressive statue? And why is it such a symbol today? Also, how widespread across the land is this statue that we say represents the United States of America? Come, let's begin our exploration.
Now once more I must ride with my knights to defend what was, and the dream of what could be.
So throughout all of our lives, wherever you are in the land, everyone associates the Statue of Liberty with the United States. And in fact, in some recognitions, it may even be considered more known than the flag, the red, white, and blue, the 50 stars, and the red and white stripes. But what's the origin of the Statue of Liberty? We'll look at the symbolism, and we're told that the symbolism actually starts from that old religion of Sun Unconquered, or Sol Invictus, from the Roman times, and even a deeper antiquity if we look at the religion of Mithras. Regardless, we're told that was the incipients for the representation of the Statue of Liberty. Now, of course, there are many different angles we can look at with the symbolism, and there's also many conflicting accounts of the symbolism itself, as it seems there's intended to be. Regardless, though, when you look at the Statue of Liberty, you see that it does have that reflection, especially of the beams above the head, the very dignified halo, and the look of the sun. Then there's also the Statue of Freedom, and this is the statue that sits atop of the U.S. Capitol. And in our explorations, we've seen numerous statues that happen to resemble this. Now, why is this called the Statue of Freedom, and what exactly does this represent? Well, it's up for your interpretation. I don't know, it almost looks like a Captain America from the distant past in a way. Then we also have the lion, and for some reason they try to tie in the lion to this representation. Now, why is that? We also recall in many of our recent explorations that we've seen the lion in many buildings, on many sculptures, and in many representations, whether it's a courthouse, a state capitol, or just some random building that we're told is built for commercial purposes. We also have the incipients of the representation of the goddess Columbia. Now, I don't want to go too far within looking at the deities because the connection is, well, it depends on what account you're looking at. Sometimes it's a very strong connection, other times it's not a very strong connection. We also have the Native American princess on the right there and cherubs all around them. Then there's also the fact of what's the symbolism of the Statue of Liberty today. And looking at these different symbols in the past, we see how the representation and the perception of it has evolved over time. This actual window here, which certainly doesn't compare to other painted windows that we've seen in churches, and I don't think I'm making a controversial statement by saying that, once hung in the World Building in New York. And you might recall the World Building. We explored it back in our New York exploration. Yes, the building that looked like a Capitol building with a dome and a pediment several floors high. Naturally, we've never really constructed a building like that since, but it was the 1800s, and we could really do whatever we needed to do in the 1800s. Now we consider the Statue of the Republic. This was the mainstay statue of the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, originally scheduled in 1892. And what's intriguing about this is, what did this really represent? Well, when we speculate or theorize that the World's Fairs had many more purposes beyond just simply showcasing certain things, it was to put an impression in people. And you might not be surprised to learn that, yes, that great tall statue from the Chicago World's Fair burned down. So what was it really made of? So we have this 1/3 scale model that we're told is made out of gilded bronze that sits there today. Of course, it doesn't match the glory or grandeur of the original statue, but why do you really need to? And in fact, here's an image, and we see that the fire had hit, and yet the statue is still standing. So perhaps it was a series of fires. There just seemed to be all this carelessness that was going on in the 1800s, and sometimes you had large fires that encompassed great areas of land, and sometimes you had precise fires. It just depended on the day and the time. But whatever the explanation behind these fires, this was a tremendous and incredible statue. And what was the real one actually made of? And I'm talking about the one at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. Was it made out of some sort of gilded copper? Was it made out of bronze? Or was it the paper mache with stucco, as we're told everything else that you're looking at in this picture was made out of? And therefore was extremely flammable. In fact, did they coat it with kerosene? Who knows? We also have many other depictions, though, of many statues from across the land, whether you're looking at administrative buildings or capitol buildings or wherever, and you see rather interesting and conflicting depictions. We see figures displaying glory and strength in a different way that we'd expect to see with Roman figures. You also see this in different reliefs, especially if you're doing explorations of old world mansions or houses, where you'll see unique figures like this, whether it's on a bed or on a bedpost or a banister, where you'll see some sort of figure that has a very lifelike face and very lifelike eyes. And someone was telling me, well, it was just all about scale, and that may be true. Perhaps it's easier to depict more human scale in larger statues or reliefs, and it's more difficult to depict them in smaller ones. But you would think it would be easier to depict them in smaller ones, and indeed you can find that greater human detail when you look at the smaller ones. The tragedy behind the Chicago World's Fair is that the fire didn't leave any buildings or statues for us to actually explore. Imagine if this statue was still standing to this day and we could actually go and examine and analyze it in person, not using computers, not using machines, because I think the best way to explore something is to rely upon our own senses. But that's just me. Perhaps you think that all those scales and those computers and consulting artificial intelligence is the way to do your explorations, and I don't hold it against you if you do. It's just a different technique. We have other images, though, of statues and reliefs and other columns and different aspects of construction from the Chicago World's Fair. And for example, in this particular statue, or whatever heck it actually was, it almost looks like a cake. What was this depicting, and what was this made out of? And does this really look like the cheap stucco? Oddly enough, though, there's something off about these images. So I can't really give you a final conclusion because, again, there's nothing there to actually examine. So all I can go off of is what the images are telling us. And the images give us a conflicting account. They show us these very well-constructed buildings, that incredible, impressive Statue of the Republic, but then you compare and contrast that with those statues we just looked at. Indeed, look at the many statues on the structure here behind the Statue of the Republic. What exactly is that showing, and what are they made of? Those are the kind of questions that we have to ask as we conduct our explorations, because I've come across many people, and I don't think they're willfully ignorant. They just have a belief that the Statue of Liberty in New York is actually made out of some kind of stone. And I suppose if you're looking at it from a distance, it does appear to be made out of a kind of stone, and that's what we'd expect. But the reality, and the informed reality, because remember, those are two different things as well, are completely different. But looking at this Statue of the Republic, it shows there was a greater glory in the past. Now onto the Statue of Liberty, the three components to it. We have the base, the geometrically precise foundation structure called Fort Wood, built in 1811, made of granite and magic super concrete. We have the pedestal, made of granite stones and magic cement. And we have the statue itself that was made in 1870s, made of copper, gold, steel, and cast iron. So, quite a conflict. Most people don't think of the three components, and of course we always have the saying, nothing is impossible in the 1800s. Indeed, the Fort Wood portion of it was made in 1811, at least it was finished, and it was to help fortify the United States from invasion from the British. Interestingly enough, although there were no major battles fought and the fort was never actually used, the only use it had was as a recruiting station. And keep in mind, this is on an island, and it wasn't always called Liberty Island, it was just the fort on it, and then they called it Liberty Island with the fort on it. Well, that seems like a very American thing to do. And we're told that the only military purpose the fort actually served was as a recruiting station during the U.S. Civil War. So let me get this straight. You have all these hundreds or thousands of recruits and you're going to boat them out to an island because that's where the recruiting station is. No wonder they had Civil War riots concerning the draft. Where's Daniel Day-Lewis when you need him? In any event, somehow they knew that this fort in 1811, when they built it, was going to accommodate both a pedestal and a statue. Now we can look at the estimates of the weight, but just consider this engineering achievement. It should also be noted that our favorite filmmaker, documentarian Ken Burns, made a film about the Statue of Liberty. Well, Ken Burns looking like he's about to undergo the Kolinar ritual there on the right. Interesting look for him. In any event, I think it's another qualifier for us when we're looking at a true old world structure that if it involves a Ken Burns documentary, in addition to it being a popular wedding venue, then it's a bona fide old world structure. Although I think we have a little bit more of a complicated account with the Statue of Liberty. And here's the actual poster of the great film if you're so inclined to watch it. And I will say Ken Burns does put together very effective documentaries. I'm not going to debate that. We always have a Shokin farewell, right? And it should be noted that the Statue of Liberty as its symbol of American prestige was used in the movie Ghostbusters 2, where they actually used the symbolic power of the Statue of Liberty to motivate the people of New York City to help defeat some negatively charged energy, slime, and an evil deity that was trying to return to the world. Indeed, they even generated it with positive slime and walked it down the street. Much like with many other structures, there has been numerous renovations that have been done to the Statue of Liberty over the years. There have been components that have been replaced, there's been refacing, there's been infinite cleaning. Bottom line up front, we have a lot of images and a lot of concepts that show us that this particular structure or the statue or this monument, whatever you want to call it, has been renovated. And indeed, in this particular image, we see the implements that we have in our modern civilization, the great sky cranes, the powerful hydraulics, and this is kind of what we'd expect to actually build a structure like this. Although you'd be surprised to know that virtually all the renovation has always been done on the statue itself, which, as we talked about, was made out of copper plating. Here we have Nancy Reagan when they reopened it. I remember in the 1980s, the renovation of the statue was quite a big national story. Although, interestingly enough, when they reopened it, that didn't seem to have as much impact as the constant renovations they were doing on it. So very intriguing. Also, here you have the National Park Service building, and what's really the nature behind this building on Liberty Island. Now, there's a reason I'm kind of poking a pun at Liberty Island, because they named it Liberty Island before they had any plans to put the Statue of Liberty on the island. They just had a military post there. Well, I guess that seems like a very American thing to do after all. And here we have other interesting images that seem to show us the copper plating face, and we've heard stories about how the torch has been replaced numerous times. And so suddenly it gives us a completely different perception of what the Statue of Liberty really is. You may think, well, it's actually made of stone of some sort, or maybe some sort of concrete, but the reality is, no, it's supposedly some sort of copper plating. Statue of Liberty was also featured in the film Escape from New York. And indeed, this was a very powerful film, and we can see the difference in scale and imagination of the head of the Statue of Liberty. Indeed, it was also featured in that, we'll just say, lots of motion camera sickness film Cloverfield, where the monster tossed the head. There you go, Donald Pleasance as president. He portrayed the president in Escape from New York. Just imagine if you had a president like Donald Pleasance. Yes, and you might recall that Donald Pleasance has been featured in many other films, and he was definitely a wonderful actor. He was also known as being the quintessential James Bond movie villain. So make of that what you will. And in the film Escape from New York, Liberty Island Security Control, United States Police Force, Liberty. I always found the juxtaposition and the conflict within that quite comical. Also considering the fact that it was originally called Bedloe Island, apparently, and it may have even had other names behind it. And that's why I always find it interesting that people get very attached to names, because names can simply be changed at any point in time. For example, I come across many Army veterans, and when I mention the name Fort Moore, they have no idea what I'm talking about. And if you're a veteran, do you know where Fort Moore is? Or do you know what state it's in? Now, if I mention another name, the older name, everyone would probably know. But the point I'm getting at is the names actually change. We also have the nearby Ellis Island, and there's an interesting comparison between Ellis and the now named Liberty Island. We also have these very interesting structures, and Ellis Island was known as the entry point for the United States, where everyone immigrating from Europe, and we're going to be looking at that carefully in a population exploration coming soon, came into the United States. We have many construction images, though, of the Statue of Liberty, and the story behind the Statue of Liberty is there were a couple of French individuals who wanted to provide a gift for the United States, and at the end of the Civil War, they were also abolitionists, so they didn't believe in slavery, and so, according to the official account, since the United States had finally done away with slavery after the Civil War, this was going to be their gift, and they constructed the statue in components in France initially, and featured different components in different places, such as the torch being featured in the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia in 1876, because, that's how you generate funding for a statue. You build it first, show off pieces, transport it, such as the head being featured here in the Paris World's Fair in 1878. Doesn't this just make total sense? Now, yes, considering the fact that this is just simply a copper-plated statue or an iron-plated statue, or even if it was made out of the cheap papier-mâché and stucco, that is, it would be the lightest objects you can imagine, how challenging would it be to transport these components across the Atlantic? We also have conflicting accounts that this is actually a construction photo from when they're assembling the statue itself. Now, this doesn't prove anything, it could simply just be an error in the account. But yes, there are errors in the official account, and that's not to suggest that there's any sort of intentional effort behind that, it's just that people make mistakes. We know that to be true. Looking at the Statue of Liberty, though, and we consider the mission of these French individuals and their efforts to get the statue built and convincing President Grant to appropriate the funding, and really what happened was France built the statue, the United States built the pedestal, and they already had the fort there, the fort that the United States had built in 1811 that just happened to be ready to fit it. And here's the individual who made it happen, Charles Pomroy Stone, genius engineer but a dodgy battlefield commander. Now, why do we mention Charles Pomroy Stone? We have a statue made in France, a pedestal made in the United States, and an old military fortification made in the start of the 1800s that were going to fit together perfectly to display the statue that still stands to this day. Now, Charles Pomroy Stone's an interesting individual, one of the brilliant engineers of West Point repute, and an early American Civil War general. Although we said he's a dodgy battlefield commander, and I know that's a Australian colloquial expression for something that just doesn't go so well. I've also heard people from New Zealand use it. So, in the Battle of Bluff, which followed the Union North disaster in the Battle of Bull Run, General Pomroy Stone, Charles Pomroy Stone, was in command, and he had a U.S. Senator, Mr. Baker, who showed up and took command of forces, and they were supposed to conduct a reconnaissance in force. Well, long story short, they allowed their force to be isolated. General Stone didn't really seem to exercise effective command and control on the battlefield, or really have any idea what's going on. And because of this, he faced a lot of criticism. This battle was a disaster for Union forces, as they had over 1,000 casualties and were defeated by a vastly inferior Confederate force. And the United States Army continues its tradition of struggling in battles in the vicinity of Washington, D.C. We have Senator Edward Baker being killed in action during that battle. So, even though he was a colonel at the time and General Stone technically outranked him, Baker was the one who took charge on the field. Can you imagine that? A senator actually getting on a battlefield today and leading a battle and then being killed? Yeah, it's kind of difficult to imagine. Well, look, General Stone was not responsible for the Battle of Bluff, and he wasn't responsible for returning fugitive slaves to their owners because he was just following the law. And even though you would think he should be condemned for this, he was not. So, again, it's that conflicting account you get from the United States Civil War. Slavery was terribly wrong, but here you have Stone Pasha. He went through a lot of difficulties, and he became Chuck of Egypt, as he was known. Now, why are we focusing on Charles Pomroy Stone? Because this was an individual who, much like George B. McClellan, who was actually his benefactor, and we've come across him before, they were fooled by the simple Quaker gun deception in the United States Civil War. But looking at General Charles Pomroy Stone, we do have a conflicting account of an individual. We're told he was an effective general, a genius engineer. He wasn't a very good battlefield commander. Well, perhaps it's because this guy was his mentor, and we've come across him before, General George B. McClellan. He's also a personal figure who is a little bit of a hero of Ken Burns, although Ken Burns won't admit that he's a hero. He'll just say that he laments the fact that he has to cast him in a bad light. I find it quite interesting. In any event, when we look at General Charles Pomroy Stone, who served in the Union Army, and then he faced court-martial, although he was never actually court-martialed, he was just imprisoned, and then he was just sort of let go. It's a really strange account. But we come always back to these same individuals, these individuals of importance and paramount during the United States Civil War, and again, it creates more questions. Here we have General McClellan with President Abraham Lincoln. This is a very intriguing image, though. I'm seeing some really odd things in questioning this. And it seems, hey, wait a minute, what the heck's happening? Is President Lincoln missing a leg here? Did he face amputation? What's going on? wait a minute, why does this guy seem to have 3 legs? Am I just seeing things? And then we have a ghost figure. I know, it's limitations in the photography, but really, why is President Lincoln missing a leg? I'm not sure. What do you think's going on here? Let me know in the comments. Okay, back on topic, Statue of Liberty. So Charles Pomroy Stone faced some crucibles. He didn't serve in the Civil War after that terrifying battle was lost and a senator was killed, which he was not responsible for. And like I said, he was not responsible for returning fugitive slaves to their owners because in the official account, he was just enforcing the law. It was the law. Does anybody else get a pass for that? No. But he built the Statue of Liberty. He was the one who made it happen. And indeed, in this little artistic depiction, we have the cornerstone being laid. I mean, why take a picture when you can actually have an artist there and sketch it, right? Doesn't that make a lot more sense? But don't worry. I know you might be asking questions about this, and you might think this is poking holes in the narrative. Well, it doesn't. Because you can see this cornerstone today. And you can see, it's right there. It says when they laid it in 1884. It also happens to say that it was dedicated in the American Museum of Immigration in 1962. So when exactly did they inscribe all that on the cornerstone? Well, it looks like the inscription was all done in 1962. I may be making an assumption there, but it all looks like it was done at the same time. You also have other interesting images of Liberty Island itself that shows the infrastructure being torn up a little bit. And the other thing I haven't commented on is just how much the pedestal that was constructed well after the fort, many decades, over half a century later, looks exactly like it. I guess they had the same magical main cement and then the same magical granite stones that they made both structures out of. And again, think of what an engineering achievement it must have been that they actually had the ability of precognition, in other words, to see the future, in 1811, that they knew that they had to make Fort Wood, which is what the original baseline structure is made. It's made for an American veteran who supposedly died in a defensive battle in the Battle of Lake Erie in the War of 1812, one of the few battles the United States military did manage to win because, looking at the military history of the War of 1812, it didn't go well for the United States. But looking at Liberty Island and then looking at Ellis Island here, you can see the look of an almost artificial coastline. I don't know, it's very strange. Well, we go back to the story of the Statue of Liberty, so the French individuals whose names really aren't that important right now because you might say, well, don't they matter to the historical account? It's interesting, though, that they wanted to give a gift to the United States, and that's how it all happened. President Grant went along with it, and the next thing you knew, it had support, and they actually funded it through donations. So really the people who made it happen were the many nameless Americans who contributed less than $1 a piece, or $33 if we go with inflation now, and that's how they managed to build the Statue of Liberty. We're informed that they built the pedestal on top of Fort Wood, and then the French individuals that assembled the statue, well, they didn't assemble a statue, they built it in pieces and then transported it to the United States, and then they assembled it in the United States. And all this was under the supervision of Charles Pomroy Stone. So, while he may have been a dodgy battlefield commander with some issues, he was a brilliant engineer. Think about this. He was able to put together architectural projects along with artistic sculpting projects from multiple different sources, fit them all together, and make it happen. Now, you're looking at this image, and you can see that this is more of the renovation, but I just show this to indicate how easily the official account could be confused, because on the right, we can get an idea of when that photo was from, and it's certainly not from prior to 1970, now was it? Yet we look at these construction images, and we can see the components of the Statue of Liberty, and oddly enough, here we have individuals just parked up on the torch as though they're having a grand old time. And we have scaffolding, and you think about the challenges of transporting this in components. But of course you can say, well, they transported obelisks across the sea, so that shouldn't have been an issue. Strangely enough, there's a curious lack of construction of the pedestal, though, which we're told that the United States had to raise the money for so they could actually put the statue that the French had made as a gift for the United States on top of. Very odd and strange. And again, we've talked about how the pedestal looks the same as a fort, but then you look at some of these other images, and this is supposedly an official construction image of the pedestal, but it's really, really hard to find images that actually show the pedestal and the fort that it's built on top of together. Now, perhaps it was just a limitation in the photography, or we could just say it wasn't very well documented, but again, it's another one of those aspects that seems to stand out. And we have no shortage of images, though, that seem to show the components of the Statue of Liberty being constructed, for some reason, and then assembled. Now, what exactly are these images really showing us? Well, in many of them, you just see what appears to be a workshop, the large components already assembled, and the components actually in the background. Indeed, what are they actually assembling here in this particular image? I mean, this is stated to be an official construction photo of the components of the Statue of Liberty, but is it, or are we just looking at something else? These are the kind of questions we have to ask when we do this image analysis. Now, I'm not, again, implying that anybody is trying to contrive anything. I'm merely stating that mistakes are made. I was wondering when we were going to see the individuals with the top hats. Hey, Frank, how you doing today? Yeah, there's a lot of rubble and junk in here, but I'll just hang out and supervise that. How's your top hat fitting? Yeah, mine feels a little tight too. Maybe we should go to bowler hats. Those might be a little more comfortable. But you have these images that just cause you to question exactly what's going on, because indeed, while these are listed as official construction images of the components of the Statue of Liberty, is this in France? Is this in the United States? You have a very mixed and conflicted account, because you can say, well, we saw in the images that they had the components displayed and photographed in France and some transported to the United States, whether it was the torch or the head. You do have images like this that give you the idea that they're building something. And yes, this could be part of the Statue of Liberty. But then you also have variance in terms of the quality. Now, is it in the quality of the image, or is it in the quality of what's being constructed? Or is this another one of Borglum's little scale models that they were building before they could build the full Statue of Liberty? Not sure. You also have the really odd images of the assembly of the statue itself. Almost looking as though they assembled it in New York City itself, and then once it was fully assembled, somehow they towed it over there to Liberty Island and then put it up on the pedestal that they rapidly built just for the purpose of displaying the Statue of Liberty. It's really strange. And indeed, some of these official images that you look at don't seem to match what we know about for photography capabilities at the time. But I don't know, maybe I'm just speaking with too much speculation, but it's just really strange. It doesn't make any sense. And indeed, you actually try to look at the account, I'll also lament the same thing that I lamented with the Mount Rushmore construction photos earlier this week. Why were these photos not well documented in chronological order? Why can we not see just a simple photo book that could easily be scanned and uploaded that show us dates and logical progression of the statue? Why is this such a conflicted and mixed account? And the explanation will be because there were issues. It was the 1800s. Remember, we have an account of a judge in Iowa in a courthouse who kept records in a shoebox. So they just weren't very good at record keeping in the 1800s. Okay, fine. But if they weren't very good at record keeping, how could they possibly be this brilliant to have a fort that was built in the 1800s, the early 1800s, a pedestal that was built in the 1880s, a statue that was built in the 1870s in components, then shipped over components, reconstructed, reassembled on a pedestal, on a fort, and it all worked out perfectly because you had a genius American engineer who wasn't the best of Civil War battlefield commanders, but he's hardly alone in that fact, and it just all worked out perfectly. And the statue is still standing there to this day. And in fact, the pedestal and the fort have been so well constructed, they've never had to do any renovations to it. In fact, the only renovations you'll see that were being done were to the statue itself. And you'll say, well, of course, because it's made out of copper plating. So it's just a series of odd accounts, and I'm not even going to go into the various numbers about the Statue of Liberty, where you see 7 and 11 and other things that come up a lot, because I'm often under the impression that numbers seem to serve to distract us. But I'm not discounting it entirely. I'm just not really exploring it too much in this exploration, because I have other explorations I'm saving number considerations for. There are many replicas of the Statue of Liberty across the United States, and this probably wouldn't be too surprising because this is a symbol of the United States, and it represents the United States. So you'd expect to see all these different replicas by courthouses, state capitals, and indeed there's no shortage of them. Yet, oddly enough, you see different aspects to the statues that are depicted. So, for example, this one in front of this courthouse, and looks like we've got one of these lovely brutalist courthouses. I wonder if this is on the same grounds that an older courthouse was. I didn't look up a particular account for this location, but the statue and the pedestal seem somewhat genuine, and of course we have a plaque on it. So what is really going on? Which of the statues are genuine and which of the ones seem to be more modern reconstructions? Well, you can find many older images across the land in the United States, and we're just looking at the replicas in the United States itself, that seem to indicate that there was a little bit more of a quality of construction put into these statues. And there's even accounts that some are actually made out of stone and some are actually carved, and maybe you got Borglum involved as well. Look at the contrast, though, in this particular image with the courthouse that this one's by, and tell me what you see here. You see this aspect a lot when you consider the differences in construction and the quality that was put in the effort in it. And you can just see it in the image, and of course, if you could go visit it and you're allowed to touch it, you can interface with it and get a better idea. You even have some statues or replicas of the Statue of Liberty that are found within the courthouses itself because smaller versions are made. And again, this would make sense within the mainstream account because the Statue of Liberty represents the United States, and like we said, every state capitol, courthouse, city hall, administrative and municipal building across the United States would want to depict the Statue of Liberty. What I find interesting, though, is there seems to be quite a variance. In other words, there's different models and different depictions of the Statues of Liberty, or what we're told are affiliated as the Statue of Liberty. And then, of course, there's many different benefactors who will suddenly provide these statues. Also, oddly enough, you have some that seem to be on pre-existing obelisks or columns or some other object that's already there, and they just decided to park a statue on top of. I mean, I guess it makes kind of sense, and it also rhymes with the account of the main Statue of Liberty that we have in Liberty Island in New York City. So very intriguing. Look at the brickwork on the building behind this one, and perhaps this is a little bit more of a legitimate one, although it seems to match in another either copper plating or bronze plating for all we know. And believe it or not, that seems to be the way many statues are made across the land, and that seems to reflect a capability that we could believe is in our current era civilization. With the faith and courage, the Boy Scouts of America. And you'll find the Boy Scouts of America are supposedly responsible for dedicating many copies of the Statue of Liberty in many of the courthouses. And you'll find no shortage of plaques that'll tell you exactly what you're supposed to think and what you're supposed to know behind them. So what to make of all this? It's hard to say. It seems to be quite a conflicted account. It seems to be as though we're given the notion that, yes, this is the symbol of the United States. Don't ask any more questions behind it. It was a gift from the French, and they even said it in Ghostbusters 2. Remember, the Statue of Liberty, she's French. Yes, of course. Isn't that a lovely courthouse building that we have there? It might have been one that we've explored before. But that's where you'll see all these in front of, and yet Liberty looks a little different in that depiction as well. Yes, of course, there's even one at the Iowa State Capitol, and it was dedicated by the Boy Scouts of America, because why wouldn't we have a Statue of Liberty at the Iowa State Capitol? But then I always wondered in the Soldiers and Sailors column, which they built in the late 1890s, why didn't they put a Statue of Liberty on top of that? Oh, no. We have a different statue of victory we're going to put on the column, not the Statue of Liberty. You also have replicas of the Statue of Liberty that are across the land, not just in the United States, and I was rather intrigued to realize just how prevalent this statue is across the land. You'll find examples in Spain and Brazil, and we'll look at some specific locations that might be surprising to us as well, but I was rather shocked to realize that yes, in Brazil apparently the Statue of Liberty is quite a mainstay there, and it looks to be the same depiction, and look at that, they even have a nice replica of the pedestal too. Boy, they went all out there. Just need the star for it. Yes, of course, there'd be one in Ukraine. This is an interesting look at a more relaxed Lady Liberty there with some glorious onlookers there that are relaxing with her, and they're all having a grand time. But everywhere you look, you see replicas of the Statue of Liberty, and I had no idea just how far and across the land the Statue of Liberty really was. Now, oftentimes in the official account, we're told that many other nations have resented the United States over the years. Or is it just as Alistair Cook said, they simply want to replicate the United States materialism, such as China? Yes, even in China, they have a copy of a Statue of Liberty, which is supposedly above a tomb here. I don't know what to make of that. Then you think about all the other locations that you have it in where you wouldn't expect to see a Statue of Liberty. I like this two-handed pose here, like she's guiding an airplane. Here we have one in Israel. Certainly didn't expect to see a Statue of Liberty in Israel. Or how about Japan, land of the rising sun? Yes, we're going to build a Statue of Liberty here. Maybe MacArthur directed it, I don't know. And in Denmark, they got one made out of Lego. Well, you got to give them credit there in Denmark. Of course it'd be made out of Lego there. Actually, I think that's a pretty cool concept. It'll probably last longer too. And wherever you have the replicas, whether it's back in Vegas or across the land, and here you have this one made by Salvador Dali, famous artist who very nearly played the Emperor in the Dune movie by Alejandro Jodorowsky. We've got one in the United Kingdom, and they're just so widespread. So what exactly is really the story behind it? It seems to be a very reinforced notion that we are supposed to embrace this symbol of liberty. Indeed, it's in the title. We're enlightening liberty across the land. And that's what the Statue of Liberty is. It's a powerful symbol. But does it have a different purpose? And what's really the story behind the pedestal and the star fort formation? Well, let's take a look at our 5 eras theory, and I'm going to give you what I think the Statue of Liberty may be. I believe that what we have here is a structure that does actually have different components that shows different eras. Indeed, the star fort, or Fort Wood, being from the 3rd era, which is what we speculate is when the star fort builders were. And that actually matches with the official chronology that we're given of the construction of the base. But that's why that base is so well constructed and why it stood up all this time, and why you could add different aspects to it. The pedestal likely being from the 4th era, or the civilization that directly preceded ours, that we refer to as Tartaria, simply as a reference term on this channel. And then very likely the statue itself was indeed constructed perhaps in the early 5th era, or maybe in a transition period between the 4th and the 5th era. But that's just a theory. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments.
The Statue of Liberty is kaput. That's disconcerting.
Well, thank you for joining me. Please like, comment, and subscribe.
I'd love to stay, but